What's up, losers? It's me, Captain Black, from the hit YouTube channel Schizo Studio. My good friend Obama is still busy serving his country, so I decided to host this Turbo Rover video out of the kindness of my heart. Today, I'll be going over some tips and tricks for the new compressor and angle lock blocks. I know the blocks themselves aren't new, but them actually working is pretty new. I won't waste your time, so let's get straight into it. Now, this first tip might seem obvious to a lot of people, but I still see plenty of people with motor-locked builds asking how to use compressors. The answer is simply right there on your plot. Compressor towers are built the exact same way as motor towers, however the connecting block may differ. If you want your tower to be invisible and weightless, I'd suggest connecting them via a text block because you can make text invisible too. The main difference between locking with these blocks and motors is not worrying about exposed motors. You can chain off a tower wherever you please. Because of this, you can now add detail to moving parts of a build, which was nearly impossible before. Some examples include hollow tank turrets, detailed landing gear, variable wings with camo, and even opening angle locked canopies. All you have to do is give these areas their own compressor tower that is separate from the main one. So, to anyone who might think my older guide is outdated, it's not. Compressor basics are identical to motors, you just have more possibilities with them. Also, if you build interiors, you can now make some truly insane stuff utilizing compressors as pistons and as motor lock. Speaking of pistons, this one is also pretty simple, but very important. When you first tried out compressors, you probably noticed they go both positive and negative. This means compressors can be a complete replacement for piston lock and should always be used over pistons. They're instant and bug-free, which blows pistons out of the water. The increments in the settings are also more convenient, as the number actually represents blocks this time. 0.5 distance on a compressor is a half block, and 1 distance is a full block. If you remember from the guide video, a full block on a piston was 2.5 distance, which is based on studs instead of blocks, which most people aren't familiar with. So, it's not just motor lock that compressors replaced, it's also piston lock. Also, if you're converting older builds to compressors, there is a formula for replacing your pistons. Simply divide your piston value by 2.5 and plug that into the compressor. Now you're finally rid of those pesky, buggy pistons. So, motor lock and piston lock have been replaced. Guess what? So was angle lock. Angle locking was replaced by the aptly named angle lock. This block instantly rotates a block to its specified angle, and can be made invisible and no collide, just like compressors. If you are confused on how to place the block, make sure to reference the small yellow angle that's previewed before you load your build. I saw many people confused on how to make angle-locked engines with this block when it released. I may or may not have been one of them. The pivot point of the angle lock block is centered, just like a motor. The surface on which the block rotates, however, is different. For making a sideways angle, you simply place the block like this. Also, if you remember from my jet guide video, you can use an online protractor and a blueprint to measure exact angles. Using angle lock, you can ensure your angles are consistently accurate. I know these tips seem bare bones, but I still see people struggling with this block. Those weren't the main tip anyway, so let's get on to that. If you haven't noticed already, a visible compressor without collisions becomes transparent when you approach it. Whether or not this feature is useful is up to you, but this limits the use. Unlike compressors, this is not the case with angle lock, which means you can make fully visible parts of your builds have no collisions. This is very useful for parts of your builds that move, as you can give them space to move inside the build without having a visible hole. For example, if you are too lazy to make landing gear doors, you can put angle locks in place of normal blocks to allow the gear to pass through. For sweep wing jets, You can give the wings space to fold inside the fuselage if it's necessary. This also makes opening canopies a lot easier. The possibilities are almost endless here. Just imagine if you could also make motor 2s invisible and no collide. If you're somehow watching this, Rick J, please. Compressors improve the looks of your builds tenfold, and the same is true about performance. As I've stated many times, this isn't a field I'm a true expert at, but I still found some useful tips for this anyway. A huge advancement from these blocks is thrust vectoring. Moving nozzles are easier than ever nowadays, since you can simply use angle lock to avoid collisions. If you build a compressor tower connected to the nozzle, you can spam as many hover thrusters as you'd like. This will give your plane ridiculous performance. I mean ridiculous. Like, what even is this? It doesn't end here. If you are still unsatisfied with your performance, you can now build direct copies of control surfaces and compress them into the original. I tried this on my rudder and it was much more responsive. If your plane has a working air brake, you can do the same thing to improve its effectiveness. This tip also applies to any type of control surface too, obviously. Just remember that every plane is built differently. Tuning a jet is mostly trial and error, so see what works best for you. Also, if you've been building planes consistently, you probably noticed the jump in performance when you switch to compressors. Because of your towers being weightless, your planes are considerably lighter than before, so keep this in mind when adding ballast. Now, let's talk about a different kind of performance. It's a little thing called FPS. Compressor blocks are not very optimized, but a lot of people still use them as connecting blocks in place of older methods like cameras. Don't do this. You are potentially dropping your performance. Use angle locks if possible, as they are less laggy blocks overall. Your FPS will thank you. My final tip is more of an extension of tip number 2. Compressors replacing pistons opened up so many more possibilities for detailing. Unlike pistons, you don't have to worry about placement or glitching your build, which means you can do several micro adjustments at once. So, to help you guys detail, I'll list the dimensions of common detailing blocks for you to reference. The base of a wing light is 0.08 blocks wide, so keep this in mind if you want a seamless line of wing lights. The entire wing light block is 0.075 blocks tall and the side of the base is 0.07 blocks deep. If you need to stack plates on top of each other to make a block with custom height, push each one up by 0.1 blocks, as that is the block's height. The bottom of a trail is 0.08 blocks wide, just like a wing light. However, trails taper inwards to the top, which is just half that at 0.04 blocks wide. So, use these measurements if you need a line of seamless trails, whether you use the bottom or top. The diameter of a rod is a half block, which means it's identical to a sparkler, minus the square base. The new microphone block base is actually slightly smaller than a rod, being 0.48 blocks wide, which means you can make some cool details out of it. Just make sure you have space to hide the stand. The base is 0.03 blocks tall, if you need to stack them for some reason. Well, that's about it for today. I hope you guys found some of these tips helpful. Another video is currently in the works, so don't worry about waiting for another 5 months. Sorry about that. Anyway, I'll see you all soon, and thanks for watching.